How you doing, Anna?
I'm good. How are you?
We are here at Harvard University, halfway between Harvard Yard and the Charles River, and we're in front of Lowell House. And Lowell House it's a neo-Georgian building built in 1930, and the president of Harvard University at the time was a man named Abbott Lawrence Lowell, one of the many Lowells, right? And this is one of 12 college houses or residential houses, as they call it here, and just 4 of the famous graduates, people who lived here: Harry Blackmun, the Supreme Court Justice, Matt Damon, who's a Bostonian, I think,
yes,
Natalie Portman, and Robert Lowell, the poet. So we thought we're going to talk for a few minutes about a Robert Lowell poem in which he sort of expresses some doubts. But the key biographical fact is that Lowell, when he was a freshman, was a legacy, because he was a Lowell. There are lots of Lowells. James Russell Lowell, Amy Lowell, and the president at the university at the time was Robert Lowell's uncle, and he lived in this house.
Just really doubling down.
He was a real legacy student. So later in his life, he wrote this sort of regretful poem, which we're going to talk about. We're going to go inside now and do that. Well, we're inside the quadrangle formed by Lowell House, and we're talking about a Robert Lowell poem. Now, this poem was written for his 1977 book, much later, the end of his life. He'd been through a lot, so there isn't much Harvard or Boston here, but whatever. Here we are. Let's talk about it. It seems to be a regretful poem. It's called Epilogue. I'll read it and we'll talk about it. Those blessed structures, plot and rhyme, why are they no help to me now? I want to make something imagined, not recalled. I hear the noise of my own voice. The painter's vision is not a lens. It trembles to caress the light. But sometimes everything I write with the threadbare art of my eye seems a snapshot, lurid, rapid, garish, grouped, heightened from life, yet paralyzed by fact. All's misalliance. Yet why not say what happened? Pray for the grace of accuracy Vermeer gave to the sun's illumination, stealing like the tide across a map to his girl, solid with yearning. We are poor passing facts, warned by that, to give each figure in the photograph his living name. Well, Anna, we'll never be able to talk about all of this, but let's hit upon a couple of topics. So, do you want to start?
I think you're right that it's a regretful poem. I think he's maybe experiencing a little shift in his poetics towards the end of his life, and he's mourning the fact that the things that used to come really easily to him into his poems no longer seem to be working, and yet he's still writing this poem that's still doing an awful lot. So maybe it's one of those like humble brag type
That's
situations.
possible, yeah.
I'm a little skeptic, I should say.
You're skeptical.
Yeah.
Well, let's be at least at first. Let's be less skeptical. There's a meta-poetic turn. Those blessed structures, plot and rhyme. Now, if this were most poets that we talk about and admire and include and curate, there wouldn't be a lot of plot.
Nor would there be a lot of blessed with that.
Well, that's true, especially there's a winking reference too, because we have plot, rhyme, and presumably meter as well, and so blessed fits out the meter of the lines. So there is that, but it is archaic, yes. But my point was that plot and rhyme, there are plots of early breakthrough, not super early, but the life studies and beyond Lowell, the Lowell of confessional poetry. There's plot. He tells us the story of his life.
Right.
So in a way, he's hinting to us when he says, "Why are they no help to me now?" Like, what was there any therapeutic value to confessional poetry?
Right.
And the answer might be no.
Yeah.
No, because this was a person whose mental ill health needed to be dealt with, as everybody found out in the early 60s, not just him, but others who suffered in similar ways, that medication combined with therapy, or in some cases just medication, was going to be what was needed.
Yeah.
Without getting too far into the details of that,
Yeah.
the point might be that years later you wonder whether the apparent talk therapy of confessional poetry did any good. Did it do any good personally? And did it do any good poetically?
Right, which not only, I mean, if we're going to keep going with that reading, he's maybe then feeling a little responsible for so many of the poets whom he also taught, like Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath, who also were involved with this confessional poetry mode, who were, you know, he was maybe having doubts about his influence.
That's a
as
deep
a teacher
reading.
on them.
I think it's a deep reading.
Yeah.
Not wrong on its face, but
Yeah.
a deep reading because there's no.
Just to
there
sort of
is only
broadly
one
contextualize.
reference possibly to the others in the mode, and that's this Miltonian,
Yeah.
Miltonic line, all's misalliance. Right,
So
and
Lowell.
that's a pattern that he has used before.
Right.
All's misalliance, and so what is the alliance? You know, what is the mode? What is the fashion? What is the trend? But I think that's pushing pretty far. Let me ask you to close read a couple of lines here. I want to make something imagined, not recalled.
Well, you're reading that interestingly because it ends with a question mark.
Yeah, how would you read it?
I want to make something imagined, not recalled.
Yeah, it's like the insertion of a question right in the middle of everything. Yeah.
Well,
But what's
he's
being
literally
said?
questioning, right? He's literally questioning, like, what do I want to make? I don't want to recall something in that confessional mode, right?
Yeah, I don't want to write about my life.
Right.
I don't want my poems to be memories of trauma or problems.
But even saying,
or
like,
family,
I want to
or
make
how
something
much I hate
imagined.
my dad, or whatever it is.
Yeah. So he's
maybe
saying,
we should imagine what the poems are about.
but even that, he's hedging, right? Because if you would say, I want to make something imagined, you say, I want to make something imagined, not recalled. Hard stop.
Yeah.
But with the question mark makes it seem like he's kind of hedging a little bit still.
Yeah. There are two references to photographs. And of course, photographs for Lowell in Life Studies and for any poet who deals with family, you look at photographs and you got those. It's art. Photographs are art,
Sure.
family art, right? Sort of outsider art in that a lot of people collect thousands of photos of families taken by photographers who weren't thinking about aesthetics.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first reference to specifically after we get the painter's vision. But sometimes everything I write with the threadbare art of my eye seems a snapshot. He might as well have said seems a mere snapshot, just a family photo. Then a little series, lurid, rapid, garish, grouped. Don't know what that means unless we're referring to a stack of family photos, heightened from life, yet paralyzed by fact. And then at the end, we are poor passing facts, warned by that, the fact of passingness, to give each figure in the photograph his living name. So, can you riff a little on anything that I've just quoted about photographs? What is this stuff about lurid, rapid, garish, grouped? And what is this stuff about fact?
Well, I think it's a further meditation on this idea of imagination and wanting to do something imagined and yet feeling weighted down by the facts of his life. Feeling, as I think many poets do, who write about families and write about their lives, like this push and pull towards the stranger than fiction or the narrativization of like your actual personal life. Paralyzed by fact to me seems like a real kind of painful sense of I'm a poet, I have this impulse to write, I have this impulse to deal with my
what troubles me.
And because I'm a poet, I also feel given to what we might call poetic license, right? I wanted, you know. So I think that's what that is. And the lurid, rapid, garish, like I don't know what grouped is either. I can't deal with that. But the way that the act of making art out of something animates it in a different way.
He's calling himself out, the threadbare art of my eye. So I see one sees photographs which lead to memories, and one sees memories, right? If you consider yourself a survivor of, and I use that word intentionally, a survivor of close calls, a survivor of deep illness, a survivor of suicidal impulses, a survivor of a fucked up family, right? If you consider yourself that, then survivors cannot ever be not paralyzed by fact.
Right.
They are, you can't get away from what made you, in the first place, need to express yourself. So, calling himself out at this late date in a poem called Epilogue, calling himself out, saying, that wasn't art, that wasn't good enough. I never really got past what was going on in my memories, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll throw out another part of this calling out and let you respond to it, because I know you're not that sympathetic to the Lowellian project.
Not especially.
Not especially. So here we are, standing in the quad, created by his uncle, the president. He lived here as a freshman. He was a legacy. Lowell is privileged from start to finish. Right? So he's basically saying, I was a victim of that privilege. That's being too blunt, I think. A real detractor might say he's claiming to be a victim of his privilege. The fucked upness of the family is partly the Lowell Bostonian tradition, which he wrote so well, that problem. It's also mental illness that was or wasn't in the family, that is or isn't connected to previous generations. That is being a victim, right? So the Lowell story is a complicated story, and I am less convinced personally these days by life studies, because I think forget it. I'll just say, less convinced by that turn. It's a dramatic turn, powerful turn, right? A lot of the new American poets whom we admire more didn't want to have anything to do with that. Right. They thought that the self, such as it is, should not simply be informing expression. Right. So they're going in a different direction. But for whatever reason, that Lowell is less interesting to me than this later Lowell, where he is fully exposing the tradition he's involved in, those blessed structures, and not so much apologizing for them as saying it's all a botch. And the poem that says it's all a botch is quite affecting. All right, your turn. What do you want to say about that?
I think if he were really, truly convinced of the botchedness of his past poetic life, he would not have included the line, I hear the noise of my own voice. The painter's vision is not a lens. It trembles to caress the light. Right? Because in that moment, he's still making room for the things that he wants to do. You know, he can't quite shake it just yet.
And lyrically, Anna.
Yeah, lyrically. I mean,
we are poor passing facts. That's a Shakespearean line.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's a Shakespearean line.
So all of a sudden invoke the collective first person at the end is quite a turn, right? When this poem is about my personal failings,
if it's a personal failings poem, it shouldn't be so perfect poetically.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I'm all for the poem that questions some of the earlier work, right? That shows. I mean, he was a very prolific poet, right? He wrote a lot. But I guess I still feel the real tension, and maybe that's interesting. Maybe I'll persuade myself, but like I really feel the tension of the current Lowell who's feeling kind of down on his earlier work, with the Lowell who's still interested in All's Misalliance, the Miltonian line, and the Vermeer. Right? He's comparing himself to fucking Vermeer. That's a crazy move.
Nobody has ever put the F-bomb as a modifier in front of Vermeer before.
I'm sure someone has.
Possibly. Final thoughts. I'll go first, and then you. Okay? All right. I want to go back to two lines I really, really like. I want to make something imagined, not recalled. I don't know what to do with that question mark. So
it's funky.
Yeah. I want to make something imagined, not recalled. I think I've said this before, I just want to emphasize it. I think he's saying that some of us are trapped by what they cannot help but recalling all the time. Right? So I cannot see the world and do anything except that poetic, narcissistic move of remembering how it is that I became the person I am, and it affects my subjectivity completely, and I see the world through that problem. Always. The deep, deep problem. Oh, I wish I were, quote unquote, normal and able to see the world somewhat as the world should be seen, rather than through the lens of my problems. I wish I didn't have that. And it's a fact that he calls a fact. And he's paralyzed by fact. He's never going to get away from it. And that's, it's a little hard to say this in, his uncle's edifice.
Sure.
It's a little hard to talk about Lowell's privilege and group him together with others who suffer so that they cannot see anything but the memories that are stuck there and can't get past them, and then eventually admit that therapy doesn't work and call it Epilogue. I'm kind of moved by that. So that's my final thought. Yours?
That's cool. I am interested in these opening lines, those blessed structure. I mean, blessed is
it ironic, possibly?
It could be, but I don't know. Okay. I think it's a
it's
invoke the muse.
1977 and you use the word blessed?
Yeah.
I think it's got to be ironic.
I guess so, yeah. It's sort of invoke the muse kind of thing, plot and rhyme. Why are they no help to me now? Well, he arrived there, so that's good.
Barely. I mean, he was gone soon after.
Yeah, but I think it is an interesting moment of questioning the value of plot and rhyme in poetry. If we can, consider a poetics that is more interested in the relationship between how we say what we say and what we say, rather than merely sort of reaching for the kind of checklist of, okay, it's got to rhyme, it's got to have plot, it's got to have meter, it's got to have... reaching for the checklist of things that make something a poem. Saying up front, I'm going to dispense with that, even though he does rhyme later on. Would like to point out.
Where's the rhyme?
Trembles to caress the light, but sometimes everything I write. But if he can at least foreground his own hesitancy, it is a meta poem. It is a mark of his. I do always admire poems that embed their own process in writing them. William's Portrait of a Lady comes to mind, a poem that is directly and consistently questioning how one can say anything at all to describe a person.
Yeah.
This is, I think, doing decent work of questioning, poetic. It's kind of an anti-ars poetica.
That turns out to be an ars poetica.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing as an anti-ars poetica.
Exactly.
That isn't an ars poetica.
Right. That's Lowell, right? That's like that's my whole issue with this
poem. So he has his cake and eats it too.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good. I mean, I'm reminded of a poem that I think anybody who's watching this conversation would benefit from reading. It's a late poem by Wallace Stevens. It's his epilogue. And it's called The Poem That Took the Place of the Mountain.
We've got a video on it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he climbs up on the top of the mountain and he looks back at, it turns out to be himself down there in the house below.
Yeah.
And the poem about the mountain that he wrote years ago, now he's writing a poem about the mountain. And he's climbing back up that poem. And he's getting a retrospective. And that's pretty cool. I don't think the painting can do that. I don't think the music can easily do that. I don't think the dance can easily do that.
No.
Poetry can.
Yeah.
Poetry can. Well, here we are at Lowell House. We've come all this way to Cambridge, Massachusetts to talk about Robert Lowell's Epilogue. I think we're happy that we did. Where are the students? I think they must be sleeping.
Or a football game.
Wake up, Robert Lowell! Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Al.